Dr. Greg Story. And please, a warm welcome for him for coming out this morning.
Thank you. Thank you very much. It's very interesting. I've spent the last 20 years here in Japan attending events like this, different chamber events, lots of stuff on leadership, lots of stuff on sales. But I'm struggling to think of any presentations I've heard that put the two things together. And I think for a lot of companies, a lot of money and time goes into training the salespeople, because numerically, obviously, there's a lot more of them. But what about the sales leaders? So as a member of this committee, I suggested, we never really hear much about sales leadership. Why don't we do a session on that? And I'm very happy to lead it. In fact, this is part one of a three-part continuum. Today is a presentation, but in May and in June, we'll do an actual workshop where we can get into more depth. Now, if you do your mathematics and you just heard there are 12 igniters that I'm going to talk about today for sales leadership, and you calculate the time, 40-minute presentation, what does that tell you? It tells you we're going to be moving lightly over a number of topics. And the things I'll be talking about are things that you already know. I'm just going to remind you about those things and hopefully maybe have a slightly different angle on some of them, which may be of value to you. So we begin. That's the first 6 that we're going to cover today. And I'll go through each of these, as I say, reasonably quickly. Can't get into a lot of depth because each of them actually is a full unit in their own right, which will require a workshop. So if you imagine we're going to do a type of 12-module workshop, for want of a better word, in 40 minutes, but we can't do that. So I'm going to just touch on some points that I think are quite interesting and relevant for you. And here's the other 6 coming up, so you'll see where we'll get to. So it doesn't include compensation plans as a topic, only because that tends to be very specific to companies and it's actually quite detailed. We probably need a whole workshop just on that. So I've left that one off, but I've picked up some others which I think are interesting. And we begin with personal leadership. And the big challenge, as mentioned before, is salesperson to sales leader. What got you to be selected to be a leader is not what you need to do now that you are the leader. Simple idea. But it's very hard as a salesperson to switch gears and go from being the salesperson to one responsible for other salespeople. The things that worked for you may not work for others. And so as you see here, the needing to be liked, salespeople basically feed off the energy of others for the greater part. They're usually extroverts or driver types normally. And they want to get that relationship going. But when you're a colleague and then you become the boss, it's not about being liked anymore. It's about being respected because you have a different role to play. But it's not so easy to just switch that and say, okay, now I'm the lead, I'm going to be respected, I don't need to be liked. You're still the same salesperson. You want to be liked. And we look here, we look, say, recognition. Salespeople motivated by money, but they are thriving on recognition. That's why they love sales contests. When we do sales training, there's one part we get to the sales contest. Every person who's in that course, who's a salesperson, wants to win the competition. It's amazing how competitive they are. So they want to be recognized. The problem is with a lot of leadership, not just sales leadership, there's very little recognition actually taking place. So as a leader, you might have been very driven and enjoyed to get recognition. But as a leader, you've got to remember, you've got to give that out now. In fact, you've got to give out a lot more than you think, from your point of view, is necessary. Because again, what motivated you may not necessarily motivate the people who are responsible to you. And again, making people happy. You try to be friendly with your colleagues, customers. That's your natural personality. You're a people person usually. But as a leader, you've got to hold people accountable. It's not about are you happy, it's about are you actually producing the things you need to produce for the company. So the viewpoint is a little bit different. And then finally, salespeople hate doing CRM. We're having a discussion earlier about customer relationship management systems. They hate it because it takes them away from the customer. And often what drives salespeople are those human relationships. But then you become the manager and your customer time, usually depending on the size of your organization, can become quite short. So a lot of things that gave you pleasure are now replaced by paperwork. And so that's a big challenge for salespeople to do that. So as a sales leader, you've got to make that break. And if you've got sales people becoming sales leaders, don't expect them just to make the switch overnight, just turn on a light switch and they change. You've got to actually coach them about their new responsibility, because often what happens is they get promoted and then the expectation is somehow they're going to know all this stuff. Well, maybe they don't. So we might think about how we educate the sales leader. Now, this very simple definition of sales leadership. The critical words in this sentence are willing cooperation. And everyone has received a copy of the Golden Book from Dale Carnegie, and there are 30 human relations principles and 30 stress management principles in this book. And how to get willing cooperation is in that first 30 of human relations principles, because we don't want just compliance, we want active, proactive willingness to go the extra mile, do the extra things we need them to do. So as a leader though, how do you get that? You have the authority, you're the boss, you can give commands. That is not that effective. You really want people themselves to be suggesting ideas, stepping up, volunteering to lead projects, taking initiative, coming up with innovative ideas. How do you get that? We don't have time to go right through all those principles, but that Golden Book you have in front of you has got a lot of fantastic ideas on how to relate to people in a way that gets them moving in the direction that you believe is best for the organization. So we always have this dilemma between focus on the people and then the process. As I said before, the administrative burden, the recording burden, the process we need to make sure the system is capturing what's happening from a compliance point of view, what's happening from a sales point of view, what's happening about the customer, getting that into the system. That takes time. Salespeople like to be with people. That's why they're salespeople. They don't want to be with administrivia. They avoid that. But as a sales leader, you have to balance that out. If you drive so hard on the processes, and I worked in banking for many years, and after the Lehman shock, the compliance requirements became very strict. And it actually found yourself really unable to do a lot of things, take initiatives, because the credit and risk departments were so tight on anything new, that it killed the process, the process, I should say, killed the initiative, that the people could actually deliver results. So that balance as a leader becomes very critical. If you just go work with the people all the time and then you don't take the process into consideration, that's when you're going to have problems later on. Where's the information? Is it correct? Is there an issue around defects? Is there a quality issue? The other part we see here is between doing and leading, and this is very hard to turn this off, and I'll talk about this in a minute. You have been doing, and now you've got to do through others. But the others may not be as smart as you, may not be as motivated as you, may not have as much experience as you, may not be as willing as you are. But that's what you've got to work with. So your own time, how you spend it, is very critical. If you go out and do the sales, that's great, but you're not developing the team. That's not so great. So as a sales leader, you're constant tension between these competing aspects of the job. We've got to be very clear. Sales leadership, your job, you're responsible, you're accountable for the sales results of the organization. But just that you could go out and do a lot of selling and achieve the results, but it's not sustainable. And that's not your job as well. Your job is to get results through people. You've got to build people. A lot of training organizations find that there's a gap between what companies want to achieve and what they're doing. And that gap is usually, they think somehow salespeople do it for themselves. Somehow they'll work it out. We aren't going to spend the time on training. We aren't going to spend the money on training. And then they don't get the results. And they wonder why. And I see this often. The reason why is very simple. You're not putting the emphasis where you need to put it. Produce results, yes, but through people, build people. And this particular graphic shows that. Year one, freshly minted new sales leader, well, you still got your old clients, and you still got all that time, and you're very happy doing what you're doing before, and you've got a few administrative tasks as well, and a couple of people to look after, but you really haven't changed what you do, so you're still selling, and you're producing a lot of the results. And that works. In year one, They look at you and they say, Gary, we've promoted you to sales leader. You're doing a fantastic job. Look at these results. Great. Year 1, you're there. But years 2 and 3, things start to go wrong. The results don't come because you have not built the people. And by the way, the targets keep moving up. So what you can physically do yourself is limited. And suddenly there's this gap opens up between you can do as much as you like, but you're not spending your time developing your people to get that leverage, and then goal and achievement starts to broaden out. So as a sales leader, you've got to be very, very disciplined about where the time is spent in building your people to get leverage rather than you being the one who carries it. And it's very difficult to switch that off. I know myself, I loved being a salesperson. I didn't love being a sales leader so much. I missed the contact with the clients. I didn't have the knowledge anymore of what's going on. I was suddenly that 1 step or 2 steps removed from the business reality, and I was doing a lot of leadership, administration, paperwork, reporting, which isn't a lot of fun compared to selling. So we've got to keep this trap in mind as we're guiding sales leaders into the job. And you see vision at the top there. It's actually a tower that goes up, but we actually start from vision and think, well, how do we get to that point? And vision is not some imaginary, wonderful magic thing. It's a very simple thing. It's where are we going? Where do we want to be? That's it. Now, if your team in any leadership position don't know that, well, it's very hard to get there if you don't know where you're going. And you as a leader need to make that very clear. The problem is, why would they care? Where's the trust factor here? If you haven't built the trust with a team, why do they care what the vision is? There's no ownership for them. And then part of that, as we see here, is the trust is maybe not built because the relationship isn't developed. You might be the boss, you might have the position, but the individual relationship may not be developed because you're so busy. You're running around doing all of your things, so you don't spend time with your team. You just see them in meetings and you see them heading out to their client meetings and you're getting the numbers. That's not a relationship. That's just work. A relationship to build trust, to get them to buy into your vision, requires time. And if you don't devote that time, it doesn't happen. And then, of course, communication. And we've got formal and informal. The formal part is quite easy. Performance review, 6 monthly. Weekly meetings, very formal, very easy. Those are easy parts of communication. It's the informal parts. And it's not that people can't do it, it's a matter of the time. Do you have lunch by yourself and read the paper or read your magazines or catch up on the American Chamber Journal or whatever it is you're reading? Or do you spend time having lunch with your team? Do you spend time later in the day talking to your team? Do you go on calls with your team? Do you talk about things after the meeting, on the train there and on the train back or in the cab or whatever it might be? Looks simple, but unless that communication is happening, you're not going to build a relationship, there won't be the trust, there won't be the buy into the vision. So we know these things, but we get busy. So talk a little bit about communication. And again, this is a whole topic in its own right. Trouble with communication is it's easier, we think, than it actually is. Well, I just tell you. I talk to George and I tell George something and George gets the message. Except George doesn't get the message because maybe the way I've said it isn't actually clear enough about what I'm saying. And maybe what he's hearing isn't actually what I'm saying because there are these filters. So I say something, it gets filtered, he hears something different, gives me an answer, it gets filtered, and then I hear something different of what he meant. And some of those common filters are things like assumptions, like very classic, if I said, okay, I'll meet you at Starbucks at Roppongi Hills. How many Starbucks are there at Roppongi Hills? There's 3. There's 3. Yeah, we're all standing around the different Starbucks waiting for each other because we've assumed it was that one. I just said, I'll see you at Starbucks, but I wasn't clear. This is a very simple example that we're making assumptions about what this person knows. One of my team often will start a conversation with me about something and I have to stop her and I say, what is the subject of this discussion? Because she's got it in her mind and she's sort of kicked it off down here somewhere and I don't even know what we're talking about. What's the topic? So again, she thinks she's being clear because she's assuming I'm on the same wavelength as she is. Are you doing the same with your team? Are you assuming they're on the same wavelength as you, be it your sales team or be it your sales leader? And then, of course, other things like viewpoints. You have a different attitude to things. Your expectations are a bit different. And we've got things like, the context of relationship. How well do you get on? How's the power structure in the office? And then emotional baggage. You may have had a disagreement with this person in the past. So it may colour the way you say things. It may colour very much the way they hear things. What you think is just a piece of information, they see as a personal attack. You're finding fault with me. Oh, you're talking about my shortcomings. You're not talking about their shortcomings from your viewpoint, but that's how they're hearing it. So clarity in what we say becomes even more important. And also, as we see here, our ability to actually listen becomes very critical, because if I'm not saying it clearly and you're not very good at hearing it and listening to it, we've got a really big communication problem, which then gets back to that relationship build, the trust build, buying into the vision that I mentioned before in the communication tower, the leadership tower. So when we look at this, are we actually stuck at the bottom? Are we really listening? Now, I've worked with colleagues, and I'm going to make a broad generalization here. Younger generation colleagues tend to be fantastic at multitasking. So while you're having a conversation, they're writing their email or powering through the keyboard, and somehow they're listening to you, and they're doing this at the same time. Well, are they really listening? Or what about selective listening? When you're very busy, you've got to control exactly how much you take in. So are you just cutting out a lot of stuff and only listening for what you think is relevant? And what are you missing? And what about salespeople too? Salespeople can have selective hearing about positive buying signs, right? And so they're focusing on that. So their hearing is very selective. They're missing what's not being said. They're missing the body language, or they're missing the message because they've made some assumptions about what's going on between the speakers. And so this is where we get a problem. How do we get to attentive and empathetic listening? This is not so easy. It's concentration, and it's wanting to really listen. And I know myself, I'm very busy. People come and talk to me. I have to stop what I'm doing completely and look at that person. But you think about a lot of conversations we have in business where we don't even get the eye contact. You're having a conversation, they're looking at the screen or they're looking at some paperwork and they're giving you an answer. That's not what I'd call highly effective listening. So think about that. Are your salespeople really listening carefully to exactly what the client's saying, what they're not saying, or not? Do they have those skills? Are you coaching those skills? Are you role modeling those skills yourself in the way you interact with the team? It sounds simple, but sometimes it doesn't work. And so we talked before about get results and build your team. Well, how do you build a team? On this diagram here, you see the four quadrants: the star, the sort of new and developing, plateaued, and then the non-performer. Where do you think we spend the majority of our time? That's not a rhetorical question, by the way. You're allowed to answer that one. Where would you spend most of your time, do you think? Sorry? Non-performers, yeah. Carlo's answer is theoretically correct. In reality, though, the low performer gets all the attention. But in fact, we should be spending 50% of our time with the stars. But what do? Oh, they're good. They don't need any work. I can now take that time and devote it somewhere else. But they have got the capacity to do even more, but we're not tapping into that. 25% of our time should be on the new and developing to get those people to become the new stars. 15% on those who've plateaued, and only 10% on the non-performer, but we tend to put probably 90% of our attention on the non-performer and sort of split 10% between everyone else. Theoretically, we know this, but practically in reality, we forget to do it. And you just find yourself gravitating, trying to fix people who dimensionally probably can't grow that much anyway. You're better to grow your stars and grow your new and developing and put your time there. But this is a discipline thing. We know this, but we forget it. And so when we have a problem with performance, there are a number of aspects to this. The first one here, I don't know what to do. So this is an lack of familiarity with the content, a lack of familiarity with maybe the system. This is just pure education. This is how you do things. Explain it. The second one here, I don't know how to do it. This is a skill aspect. So this is training. Do you have training? Do you have training for those particular skills? Does your training system tend to be a one-size-fits-all, which doesn't actually hit the needs of individuals, which may be different? And then we look at, I don't believe I can. Now, confidence in sales is a critical thing because your emotions are on a roller coaster. You go into one meeting, it's fantastic. You go into the next meeting, it's a disaster. You go into one meeting, they're all nice to you. You go in the next meeting, they're cold as ice to you. So you're up and down all the time. So confidence is a winner in sales. How do you deal with people who are going through this roller coaster of emotions and keep their confidence on a straight level? This is basically, you've got to be coaching them. And then we talk about, I don't know why I'm doing it. This comes back, they haven't bought into the vision. Why are we doing this? Why is this important? They haven't signed on. Because you haven't got the relationship, because your communication skills weren't there. You haven't built the trust to convince them to buy into the why. So in this case, this has got to be develop that relationship, develop the trust. And the last one is, well, actually, no, I don't want to do it. And in Japan, there's a great system here of you don't say, I don't want to do it. You just say, I don't understand. All right? That's code word in Japanese for I disagree with you and I'm not going to do it. All right? I wrote an article on that, actually, quite a long time ago, on the difference between I don't know and I don't want to do it. So when you hear I don't know, don't presume it's one of the above. Presume it might be a motivation issue. So what do you do about motivation? The solution to motivation is understanding what's driving the team. One of the problems is we may be making assumptions. There are some filters around what we think is driving the team. We may not be having that informal communication to really know what are the motivators. I don't know whether you've ever had this experience, but you can work with colleagues and then they're doing an okay job. They're not on fire or anything, they're okay. But then you discover they've got this immense passion for a hobby. Incredible. And they're just, when you find out, you're just stunned at the amount of energy and money and power and everything they pour into this hobby that's not going into their job, not going into their career because the motivation is not there. So if you don't know what's motivating people, how are you going to build that trust? How are you going to build that relationship? How are you going to know how to angle the communication to start building the relationship? How well do you know your people? Again, when you're very busy leading, all that administration, running everything, your time with people goes down. They're busy running around seeing clients, having fun. You're doing all the bits back at the office. Where do you get to know what's motivating those people? And motivations change. A conversation you had 2 years ago may be now irrelevant. Are you having a conversation? If I ask you now, this is a rhetorical question, so relax. But if I ask you right now, give me the names of 3 of your people, or colleagues even for that matter, and tell me what their key motivations in life are. Can you do that? If you can't do that and you're a leader, you've got a major problem around trying to build trust and motivation. So we've got to know what is happening. Here are some common motivators for people. Now, this may not apply to your team. It may not apply to your Japanese team. It may not apply to yourself. It may not apply to colleagues. But these are fairly common. All I would say is, here are some ideas, some starters on how we might think about what motivates people and start looking for these, but better still, have those conversations, have that interaction, build that trust to actually find the reality for each person because they're all bound to be different. And this is also the other thing for sales leaders to understand is what motivated me to become someone who stepped up to a higher position may not be at all relevant for the people who work for me. So you're seeing them through the filter of your own eyes on what you think is important. And it's a classic with leadership. Of course everybody wants to be a manager. Well, maybe not. You're making an assumption there. Maybe they look at you and say, I don't want to be like that. I don't have to do work those sort of hours and have that sort of pressure. I want to spend time with clients. I like the fun bit. I don't want to do administration. I don't like CRM. So again, we're making assumptions about people. What are the motivators? That's what I would ask you. When we talk about recognition systems too, all three of these are important. It's not to say the sales competition or the recognition of the top salesperson, or at the convention, you've flown to the convention, you wined and dined if it's a big enough organization, or you're one of the top of the tree in your company, you're on the board, you're the leaderboard there. That's very, very important. Informal too. And it's those often, the formal pieces are rather set in time, so between those you've got the opportunity for informal. And as a leader, when was the last time, and they've got the idea of pizza here, but did you take anybody out for lunch lately? Did you take the team out for lunch? Do you have team get-togethers? Did you buy the people in the office something? Japan, food always goes down well, and to give people something. There's small things of appreciation. So recognition daily. Now that sounds, wow, daily. The trouble is we are taught to be defect finders. We are skilled in finding problems. We are experts in finding what's not right. As a leader, we've got to try and flip that around and start being good finders and try and find things we can praise and things we can recognize. And just small things. You want something done? The classic is you just give the order. I need that report by Tuesday. Boom. You read Dale Carnegie's Principles in the Golden Book, you're not going to do that. You're going to say something like, oh, by the way, thank you very much for your contribution in the meeting on Monday. That was a really interesting point you brought up, and I think everyone gained a lot from that. I certainly did, thank you. By the way, the report, can I get that on Tuesday next week? Do you hear the difference in the language? Right? But time-pressed leaders, short form, report next Tuesday. That's it. So again, that daily recognition, the idea of looking for good, if your starting point is looking for good, your whole conversation not only changes, it improves. This is a very critical area. I love this part of sales training and part of leadership training about different personality styles. Now, there are about 400 slides that go with this, and I'll cut it down to one. Now, we all have our preferred style, and we have more. We're all of these styles. We're all partly analytical, part amiable, part expressive, and part driver. But we'll tend to move towards one of these more than another, and if we're skilled, we'll move through them depending on the situation. And there are lots of things to look at who is what personality styles. And Myers-Briggs have a very great 16-section analysis of who you are. I'm not that smart. I can't remember 16 data points about someone to work out what personality style they are. I can only manage 2. And this is what I find works very well, is I make 2 decisions when I meet people. On a scale of low to high, is this person low in assertion terms, or are they high in assertion terms? How do I tell that? Power in their voice, strength of opinion, number of ideas they have, how forcefully they project themselves to me. That's assertion. That's one decision, high or low. Boom. Second decision on a vertical scale is this person people-oriented or are they outcome-oriented? Do they talk about the results or do they talk about the team? So again, as you're talking to people, you'll get an idea of where they're located. So that simple four-point quadrant between those 2 decisions, very quick and easy to make that. The trick is not knowing it. The trick is being able to switch gears yourself. Unfortunately, the vast majority, and I'd say this is probably, 90%, I'd say maybe 95% of salespeople always operate in their preferred style. So if they're an expressive, and lots of salespeople are because you need to be assertive, but people-oriented, and you're dealing with a CFO or you're dealing with a scientist, this would be great for Andrew, for dealing with chemists, right? If you're dealing with lawyers, they're very analytical people. They're very data, evidence, proof driven. And you're up here, the big picture, strategic, blue ocean, inverted commas type of discussion, and they want to know who says so besides you. Where is the evidence? Show me the numbers. You've got to get out of being expressive and get into being analytical and talk about evidence. The same way with the driver. I'm a driver type, by the way. All right? I know myself, I'm a driver. What do drivers live by? Time is money. Let's go. Boom, boom, boom. don't waste my time. That's the driver. So when you come into my office, you say, Greg, we should do this. Here's the 3 reasons why. I recommend this one. And you get a decision straight away. Yes, no, boom, get out of my office. That's a driver. But if you're an amiable, which is the opposite type, Greg, let's have a cup of tea. Let's get to know each other. Let's think about the team and how they're going to feel about this. Totally opposite approach. So if you're an expressive, for example, and you're with a driver, as a salesperson dealing with a driver, straight to the point, don't waste their time. They're very happy about that. They're very quick decision makers. But if you're dealing with an amiable, it's typical, sort of urban versus rural. You're standing too close to them if they're from the countryside. If you're in an urban environment, you don't mind standing so close. Their voice is quite loud in an urban environment compared to a country environment. The speed of speech is different. So it's the same type of thing we see culturally in our normal society. It's the same thing. A driver doesn't mind fast-paced, quick decision, move on. An amiable, that loud, strong voice. It's a bit too threatening and moving too fast. And they're not thinking about the people part. What about the team? The viewpoint is different. So the point for a salesperson or a sales leader is, as you discover what particular preferred style that person is, you need to switch gears. You stay the same personality. You're not becoming a schizophrenic type of person with 4 different personalities. You have the one personality, but you have 4 speaking styles. And the ability to do that is a critical skill for salespeople and sales leaders and leaders in general. So, in terms of performance management, this is very, very interesting. We talk about the law of restricted performance. What happens here is you've now become from salesperson to sales leader as a promotion, and you're responsible. So then you discover that the salespeople are actually conditioning your expectations. You've got to hit certain targets, and they're telling you, boss, it's a jungle out there. Competition's just incredible. The economy, look at it. And so your expectations are getting taken down. And so you start to see them as basically down here, not up here. So what do you get as a result? Mediocrity. So it's very important as a sales leader that you don't get into that cycle. You've got to keep challenging your salespeople. They'll tell you 1,000 reasons why it's never going to happen. But unless you keep challenging them, you're only going to get a mediocre outcome. It's a very difficult thing to do that, but you've got to keep thinking, I'm sure they can do 20% more. If you only just keep that one sentence in your mind every time you're dealing with salespeople as a sales leader, you'll do much better, because then your expectations are up here. And they will come up to your expectations. But boy, they're going to take their time, and they're going to kick and fight and bitch and carry on all the way up, because that's how salespeople operate. And by the way, they're fantastic at it because they're so persuasive. That's why you employed them. These people are persuasive. They're believable. They're good at this stuff, right? Be careful about them being too good at this stuff. Okay. So when we have mistakes, and this is interesting, we ask people to be innovative. We ask people to step up. We ask people to take responsibility, particularly step up and do new things. But by definition, we will fail in things that are new, or we will have less success in things that are unfamiliar for us. We have to have some margin for these people to fail. If you ask people to take ownership, sponsor a project, run the project, and they make a mistake, something goes wrong, and you just come down on them so hard and criticize them, complain about what's happened, and this is unbelievable, what are you thinking? Guess what? You've just cancelled their innovation ticket for the rest of their life. They'll never put up a suggestion ever again, because the penalty of failure is too high relative to rewards of success. You just kill their innovation right there. So how we handle mistakes is very, very critical. And you see it here. We start with research. What actually happened? Not what you were told happened, or what people who report to you imagine happened. Actually, what happened? And then in the conversation, we start with rapport. Because if there's been a problem, do they need to know there's a problem? It's very rare that someone, when there's been a mistake, doesn't know there's a mistake. Hey, guess what? This is not new information from them. They know there's been a mistake, so they already feel bad. And they're expecting to get hammered by the boss, because that's how we've all learned. That's how we were educated, unfortunately. Don't be that type of educator. Why not start with building some rapport? Tell them how valuable they are to the organisation. They make one mistake or a big mistake, they're still valuable to the organisation. I remember a story, I think it was Lee Iacocca, I might have the names wrong now, but one of his executives lost a couple of $1 million through a particular project. And the guy goes to his office expecting to be fired. And he says, "Fire you? We just spent a couple of $1 million educating you." Different way of looking at it, you see. So start with, they're valuable to the organisation. You appreciate that they stepped up. You appreciate that they do good work. Not everything is 100% failure. There's 99% probably working. Recognise those parts, build the rapport, make them feel comfortable. Second point there is you reference what's happened. Then at that point you get the reaction. Are they in denial? Or are they, yes, sorry, I made a mistake. So depending which way we go, if they can relate, then you restore your trust in them, you reassure them, and maybe they might need training, or you're trying to keep that person. Okay? We just educated you, spent a lot of money educating you with this mistake. You've learned from that. You're going to be a better manager, a better operator as a result. If they're in denial, then you're going to go a different way, which you're going to restate very clearly for them what's happened and the ramifications. There's probably going to be a reprimand in there around their performance and potentially affect their remuneration, their bonus, etc. And then if they still don't get it, then maybe there's no longer a place in the organisation for them because their motivation or their commitment is such that it's not sufficient for the organisation. Now, this next slide is a bit busy in the sense of it's a build, but it refers to each of these problems and it relates one of the principles that you'll see in the Golden Book that you've got there. So the first one there is rapport, and it says begin with praise and honest appreciation. Now, often conversations don't begin with praise, especially when there's been a mistake. It's usually straight into what happened in the mistake. Begin with praise and honest appreciation. Build that rapport. That's how you build it. You tell them what's good and what they need to do better, or recognise things are already doing well. Then the next stage, as you see, we get in here to the reference and relate. So we're trying to look at calling attention to mistakes indirectly. They know there was a mistake. Hey, you made a mistake. This is not helpful information. Okay? So you don't put it right in their face. You try and talk about it indirectly. Second one there is, are you perfect? Did you never make a mistake in your career? Isn't that not how you got knowledge? Is that not how we've all learned everything we know that works by doing it the wrong way? So you talk about yourself. So you show them that, hey, you know what? I understand. Yeah, I've done that too. I remember when in my career, your stage, I made mistakes too. It's not a life-threatening problem necessarily. And then ask questions instead of giving orders, because once you give the order, you own it. Once you ask a question and they answer it, they own it. And what you want is ownership on their part, not on your part. So we move on to the next stage. We relate to the next principles. So here we're talking about resistance, or we've got to restate it, or we've got to restore. So let the other person save face is a very oriental idea, which I'm just amazed that Dale Carnegie in early part of the 1900s could actually take that into New York, where he's based, and get New Yorkers to go for that. I don't imagine that New Yorkers ever cared about anyone's face ever, but he was thinking about how do you build a relationship. So there's been a mistake, but you've still got a relationship. Where's that trust? Where's that communication? How do you get them buying the vision? How do you get them working well again? So let them save it. And after that, praise the slightest improvement. Don't save it up for a rainy day that when there's a really big thing happening, I'm going to tell you it's great. Small things get picked up, and that's motivating. Oh, it's not a big thing, but it's a small thing, but you're recognised. Do you feel good about that? And then finally, give the other person a fine reputation to live up to. If I think you're rubbish and you're not very good, I'm going to talk to you and approach you in a certain way. If I think you've got great potential and there's been a blip, a mistake, and I think you can grow much further, I'll approach you in an entirely different way. And in fact, my approach will determine how you're going to turn out. Because if I think you're no good, you're going to be no good. If I think you're great, you're probably going to be great. So we have got so much power as a leader in determining the outcome of that person. This principle, give them a fine reputation to live up to, is a good one. See them as positive. See them as potentials who've got greater growth opportunity. And then we get into reassure and retain here. So use encouragement, make the faults seem easy to correct. Okay, break it down, what went wrong, yes, how can we fix that? And then finally, make the other person happy about your suggestion in this part. If you tell someone something, you own it. If you ask a question and they answer it, they own it. And through this process, they go into a stage of self-discovery. So rather than you giving them the answer, they find the answer themselves. They believe it a lot more, it's more credible for them, and they remember it forever. So self-discovery as an educational process is vastly superior to just telling people information through lecture or through advice. So rather than being an expert in advice giving, try and be an expert in bringing out questions to get self-discovery. And then here we have the reprimand and replace, and it says here, as you'll see in the 30 principles, use all of them, because this is people skills, and this is where, you know, if they are going to leave the company, you want it in a way that is not acrimonious, destroys the motivation of other people, creates any sabotage problems, or influences that person's ability to move on and want to move on and be confident to move on and do something else, because obviously this hasn't worked out. So Dale Carnegie's principles are very helpful. And talk now about how we actually transfer skills through coaching. Because as a sales leader, you need to coach people. You need to get people to move from one skill set to another. But there's virtually no training for that. If you're an educator, you're trained in how to do that. But if you're a salesperson, you become promoted to sales leader, where was that bit in your education? It doesn't exist. Now, this is a whole workshop in itself. You know, it's probably a couple of workshops in itself, so I can't cover everything. But I just want to cover a couple of key points here. The first one there is hear and listen. Salespeople hear, but do they listen? And this is where you've got to check. Are they just hearing but not actually listening? If you want to educate people, check they're actually listening. Get some feedback on what you've just said, because they're nodding. You know, the lights are on but no one's at home type of problem. Their eyes are open but they're actually not listening to you. If they listen, then they have a better chance of understanding. And check for understanding. Is there actually understanding there? And then relate that to their ability. You know, they're already doing things well. They could always do things better. So be a person who looks for what's going well and praise that, recognize that, and recognize that they could do things better. Don't be a fault finder, someone who criticizes. Look for the good and tell them how they could do it even better. And then we're looking for their motivation to learn, to self-discover, self-address the problems, and to get that commitment to educate themselves. Now, in a skill transfer process, there are lots and lots and lots of detail on this, but those are the fundamental steps we have to go through. And you've got to be hitting motivation. You've got to be getting that commitment to get them to take up those skills. Because often people feel very comfortable in their comfort zone around the things they know now. They don't think they need to do anything new or different. I'm good where I am. But you've got to get the motivation to want to do better. You've got to get that commitment to have the behavior change. And if there's one thing, if you ask me, well, what does Dale Carnegie training do that's specific to Dale Carnegie? I would say it's getting behavior change. And that is extremely difficult. We are trained trainers, 250 hours minimum training to become a certified Dale Carnegie trainer, to get behavior change. And for us, we know how hard it is. So if you're just a salesperson who's become a sales leader and you haven't any of that type of detailed training, how do you get behavior change in people? Not very easy. So these steps become very important. Now we look at the cycle of accelerated learning here. And on the top right-hand side, attitude, yes, they may need to, they may want to, but they don't do it. There's no behavior change. There's a motivation gap there. They're not motivated enough to make the changes in what they normally do to get a behavior outcome that's different. So that's one problem we've got to work on. So you've got to get them to, I will do it and show me how. So you've got to work on that attitude. Just telling them it doesn't work. You've got to get them to actually want to do it. That means take it from, yes, I will, to I do. Okay? And then we come into knowledge where we've got principles, fundamentals, concepts. Same problem. I give you information. It's a classic of the old cliche about giving people fish and teaching people how to fish. When you give information, you're giving people fish all the time. So you give them some fish today, well, you've got to come back tomorrow and give them some more fish, more information. It just goes on and on and on. The problem is you give them the information, but they don't use it. They're still in their comfort zone. They don't own it. So you've got to come back and give them some more later for the next round of fish. Instead, what you want is self-discovery. You want people to own the information and to want to use it, to actually take the behavior change to use it. So that gets out of I know into I do it. That is a critical part. And the way to do that is here, right practice with coaching. So correct modeling of the behavior, and then the coaching to get that I know becomes I do. And this is where, for a lot of training, it breaks down because we stop at the sort of intellectual level of I know, and it never gets into the physical of I do. And then finally, once we get that, it becomes a habit, becomes a default habit. So you have follow-up coaching, you try and make that the new behavior pattern so that you get this cycle of learning in adaptive skill transfer. But you've got to have all of those pieces happening to get an outcome. So sales meetings are sort of interesting. Most meetings probably don't need to be held anyway. Well, certainly probably don't need to be held for as long as they're held. That's the first problem. And sales meetings tend to be very one-dimensional. What are the numbers? What's the pipeline? Because time is short. Why is time short? Because the sales leader is still trying to do too much themselves. They're not thinking how to get it with production through the team members, through leverage. So the sales meetings become very truncated. So instead of opening, say for example, you start with a report on the goal achievement, where we are today, and that's just one part of it, that tends to become all of it. Then what about this next part here, about inspiration and motivation? Because as I said, sales is a tremendous roller coaster of emotions, and people need to be motivated in sales. It's a very critical part of dealing with this very nature of the business. Are we doing that? Are we inspiring and motivating people in the sales meeting, or are we just hearing numbers and then looking at people, where's the rest of the numbers? And then, of course, information updates, what's happening with products, what's happening with clients. Very important to share that, particularly who's doing what with who, so you're all coordinated within the company. Yes, use it for training of coaching, knowledge, skills, some practice. If you're presenting a product, present it to each other, practice, get some role play going, get some coaching of the role play, 3 and threes. All these things can be done. It doesn't take very long. If you're doing cold calling, or if you're doing phone work, sit back to back so you can't see each other and imagine you're speaking on the phone. Have some person monitoring it and then rotate. These things don't take very long. By the way, they're free. It doesn't cost any money. And then finally, we set some goals. Now, you have goals for the year, but maybe this is where we are in the business this week or this cycle. Where do we want to be next week? What's going to happen on certain things? Let's get some information on this. Let's gather some information on that and come back next week and use it. So the full sales meeting hardly gets used. The potential of having a really full sales meeting is there, but you're probably getting 10% of the potential, I would say, for most sales meetings that I see anyway. Now, time management, again, this is a whole workshop in itself. I'm not going to go into too much detail on time management, and Carlo's checking his watch there, so obviously we might have a time problem, I don't know. What time have we got, Carlo?
It's 5 to 9.
5 to 9, well, we're almost done. Problem here is the inbox looks like this, and if we took things off the top of a pile of papers and did it in that priority order, no one would be happy. But that's what email's doing to us. It's giving us this type of undifferentiated ability to use our time, and as Drucker says there, time is all you've got. How you manage that, that makes all the difference. So, what are some principles we need to look at here? Basically, this is a key one. We know the Pareto principle, 20% of the salespeople produce 80% of the results. Great. The trouble is, where do we spend our time? Are we spending our time on the 20% of things that get the results? Are we spending 80% of our time on the 20% of things that get the results? The answer usually is no. We're usually spending 80% of our time on the 80% of things that get 20% of the results. So go back and look at your time and you say, well, how do we do that? Things like, you see time logs, you want to find out where you're spending your time, check it. And on this list, prioritizing and delegating are huge time savers, but we don't tap into them. A lot of people don't operate off priorities. Whatever happens in the day happens in the day. They don't direct the day, or they don't delegate. That's the other one. So for prospecting, the top 2 there are where all the money is, and they're free. You've already got existing clients. How can you get more share of wallet from that client? And you're doing a good job. How do you get referrals to get more clients. And the other one there is cold calling. There are techniques for that. Everything else costs money, but there's so much left undone in these two areas of account penetration and referrals that we wonder why we have to spend all this other money. And of course, we think that business social media is an answer. It's not an answer, it's just a tool. Again, if we're not really working those other two, it doesn't matter how well we do this, you might be waiting for the leads. And it is a numbers game. How many people you see, or how many people you call, how many you speak to, how many you get to see, how many proposals you get to put out, how many contracts you get done, average size of contract, it's all numbers. It's all numbers. So once you know those ratios, you track those ratios, you can tell where the gaps are, and you can tell basically how the pipeline will go. If I ask salespeople, do you know your own ratios? If I ask the leaders, do you know your people's ratios? Often the answer is no, they don't know. And again, what I sell, what I buy, different. Does the salesperson have a clear picture of what's motivating the buyer? Often not. They're concentrating on what they're doing. How do you find that out? Ask your client. Why are they satisfied? How do they apply it? What were the results? What was the return for them? Go back and look at those things, and you'll find how to speak to clients about what's in it for them. So, meet the client. After the client's had that meeting, you might have come up with some problems that haven't been resolved. Fix those. Get some referrals. Try and get some more business. It's not a difficult thing to do. So, account development. How does your client see you in these aspects? How is your brand regarded by the client? Product, your service, the salesperson's value. How do they regard that? If you don't know how they see you in those areas, how are you going to have a rich relationship of trust with the client? Do we know those things? And in the organizational chart, where is our champion? Where is the person in the company who wants to have our relationship as part of that company's progress? Do we know where they are? And who's the decision maker? Are we talking to the right person? Often we're not. Do we know who the decision maker is? Often we don't. Often the salesperson has got no idea. And what's driving the decision maker? Depending on where you sit, depends on how you see it. The CFO sees it differently to the CEO. The Chief Operating Officer sees it differently than everybody else. The Chief Scientific Officer sees it differently than everyone else. Understand where you sit drives what you see. And then the top is the primary interest is what is it that we want, and the bottom one, the dominant buying influence, is the why we want it. Do we know the difference? Do we know what they want? Do we know why they want it? Okay, and this is, time management, pipeline management. The bottom line here on projection is the bottom here of total projected. Start there. You start at the bottom. This is where we want to get to. And then you go up and you fill out those other details to work out how you're going to get there. Don't start from the top and get a number. Start with a number and work backwards as to where you need to be. How many new prospects you need. How much share of wallet you need for account penetration. Very simple thing. And then this is a great exercise. Put your solutions down one side of a chart and put your clients across the other. And then start matching solutions for clients. Every time you do this, you'll be amazed at how many more solutions you have for clients than you are currently serving them with. Try it. It is a very simple exercise. Very revealing. Very revealing. And then, what's your top account criteria? What are you looking for? Who is the ideal client? Do you know that? Do your salespeople know that? And where are we in the pipeline? Are we going to have plenty today and then next month there's going to be, sales down? And then, 2 months later, they're up again. Is it up and down? Or is it consistently coming through? Do you know where it is today? And lastly, innovation. We need to do more, faster, better with less. That means ideas. And basically, on this chart here, you've got two ways of going. You've got continuous improvement and leapfrogging ideas. Continuous improvement is very steady, but don't just use that. Also look for leaps where we can jump, take an absolute leap forward. Because one is looking in the rearview mirror of the past, and the other is trying to look to the future. So between the two of these, you're going to get the outcome you want. And then in terms of brainstorming, very, very simple idea. Green light, red light thinking. Green light, what is possible? Red light, is it possible? Just don't mix them up. Okay, do one, do the green light first, do the red light second. Very, very simple thing. Often though, in innovation, people start criticizing ideas in the idea generation stage, which just kills the innovation right there. So green light, red light, keep them apart. And finally, there's a 9-step process to innovation. And you start with the visualization, where do we want to be? Then we have fact-finding, where are we? Problem-finding, what is the problem? We need to identify it, and which problem are we going to work on first? Prioritization. Ideas, to prove we can do that, that's green light thinking, get a lot of ideas out. Then the next one is solution finding. Which of those ideas is the most viable? That's making a judgment. That's the first part. The last section here, where, okay, we get approval and support and funding to drive the idea. We have implementation, so we start trying it. Is this working or not? Follow-up, how is it going? And then finally, evaluation. Did it work or not work? So those are the 12 igniters for sales leadership that I've covered today. As I say, this is a big topic which I've tried to hone down, probably not honed it down as well as I probably needed to. But thank you very much. I'd like to leave you with a thought. The leader in sales has got tremendous power to influence the organisation. Make sure that power is being used to its maximum effect. Because if you do, you will be much more successful than your competitors, because trust me, they are all really struggling. Thank you very much.